Faulty assumptions about the nature of cholera might have gone on forever if, on August 28, 1854, an infant known as Baby Lewis, her real name was Frances, had not contracted the disease. It's not known how the baby got cholera. However, it is known that her family lived at 40 Broad Street, which had a cesspool in front that, unfortunately for everyone in London, bordered on the most popular water pump in Soho, the Broad Street pump. This pump was famous for the high quality of its water. It had such a good reputation that even people who didn't live nearby would use it for their water supply. So it's unfortunate that once her baby contracted cholera, Mrs. Lewis tossed Frances's filthy excrement into that cesspool where it began contaminating the pump's water supply. Though the water from the pump was barely discolored, the cholera bacterium began its deadly work. 74 people in the neighborhood died by September 3rd. Hundreds more were on the verge of death. Within a week, 10% of the neighborhood was dead, including Frances's father. Although cholera often killed devastating numbers of people in a memorably agonizing way, it didn't usually work so quickly. Typically, it took months to kill the hundreds of people who, in this instance, died within days. Snow lived only a few blocks away from the neighborhood. While the other residents of Soho fled to stay with friends in different areas of town, he eagerly began his investigation. As soon as I became acquainted with the situation and extent of this eruption of cholera, he wrote, I suspected some contamination of the water of the much-frequented street pump in Broad Street. But how to go about proving his theory? Snow began going through the neighborhood and questioning the inhabitants about the habits of everyone who had acquired cholera. He constructed a map charting the outbreak, and in doing so noticed that the closer people were to the Broad Street pump, the more likely they were to be sick or dead. Those who did not get cholera had their own wells or, for whatever reason, chose not to use the Broad Street pump. Not all of the cases were obvious, of course. A few people didn't recall drinking water from the pump. However, they had consumed sherbet, which was sold on the street and made from water from the pump. Another woman lived in Hampstead, absolutely nowhere near the Broad Street pump, and yet she had still contracted cholera. So had her niece, who was staying with her. This would seem to contradict Snow's theory, if not for the fact that the woman had formerly lived in Soho and believed the water from the Broad Street pump was the best. Her son explained to Snow that she loved the water so much that her children periodically bottled it and sent it to her in care packages. The lady's inadvertently murderous family sounds so sweet and caring, and I feel very sad for them. But I'm guessing Snow was at least pleased on an intellectual level. Finally, here was the proof that the London Medical Gazette had claimed was necessary to prove that cholera was carried by water. In this case, the water had quite literally been moved to a community where cholera had been hitherto unknown and produced the disease in all who used it. The Hampstead cases could not simply be explained by the sickly-smelling air around the Broad Street pump. On September 7th, Snow shared his findings with town officials and implored them to remove the handle from the Broad Street pump. He explained the high rate of disease around the pump and how even people far removed from the pump who had drunk from the same water supply became sick. On September 8th, the handle to the Broad Street pump was removed. Today, this breakthrough is the stuff of legend, so much so that when officials at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention are looking for a solution to a medical mystery, they are known to joke, "Where's the handle to the Broad Street pump?" No sooner did the cases of cholera decline than people began to look for alternate reasons for the abatement. The Globe, a newspaper, attributed the decline as owing to the favorable change in the weather. The pestilence which has raged with such frightful severity in this district has abated, and it may be hoped that the inhabitants have seen the worst of the visitation. No, wrong. But it was so much easier for people to think that bad odors, which they could smell and experience themselves, caused disease, than to believe that it was due to something invisible in the water. In March 1855, Snow was called upon for testimony regarding an amendment to the Nuisances Act, which hoped to regulate industries like gas workers and bone boilers. Those industries emitted disgusting fumes into the air, so Snow was put in what must have been a peculiar position of defending the rights of the industry to render bones, which, while gross, was not actually causing cholera. His testimony gave him the opportunity to strike down the miasma theory.